yet given out all the marks. I'm just giving it slowly one by one. So don't worry, you will by today. I am happy with your results on the whole. Most of you have done well. And even if you haven't been able to do as well as you've expected for this one, I mean, for the test one, don't worry about it. Um, you still have more summatives to compensate. I've not marked your, or I haven't finished marking your project yet, so that might take another 2 to 3 weeks. All right. I'll try to get it back to you before that. Try not to extend it until 3 weeks. Hopefully the workload doesn't get to me. All right. Otherwise, yeah, I am kind of happy with your test one results actually. But make sure you do even better for your projects because it's the projects that carries the maximum weightage. And don't forget about your coming tests. So your test 2 is in week 11, and that includes topics from weeks 5 to week 9. All right. So I'll just pin that information. Test 2. Just write that. So will be in week 11. What's the date in week? Week 11 is the 4th of May. All right, so when I say topics from week 5 to 9, that includes only until what I've taken now. All right. The lecture that I'm going to be taking after this is from week 10. So it doesn't include week 10's topic. It only includes until week 9. All right. So yeah, that's been there. Okay, so can we get started in that case?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So I've shared the lecture slides and the exercises for week 10. I'll only be taking the first lecture, that is about the structure, unions, the command line arguments, and the variable arguments. The second slide, which is about the basic coding standards, that's for your reference. So that is, most of it has already been discussed. So it's just like a handbook for you to refer to understand the coding standards. All right. So yeah, I'll just start off with the day 10 lecture. And message me whenever you think you can't hear me. I don't know why this morning it has been creating problems. The internet also seems to be working fine. I don't know what was the problem this morning. All right. So let's get started. Can you all see?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So the main purpose of this lecture is to understand what structures are. And yeah, the others also to understand the others, but the main thing is about structures because this is like an entry point to the next concept that is called classes, which is one of the main breaking points of C++. So I think in the first few classes I'd mentioned that C++ is an object-oriented programming language. So that is what classes will help us to understand. Classes is the main concept that will help us to understand why it is called an object-oriented language. But before that, let's start off with the basic structure. All right. Okay, so structures were actually started in C language and C programming language. So our structure style is also similar to a C structure. So it's called a structure because it's got a struct keyword before there. All right. So this is a keyword followed by the name of your structure. So you can give any name to your structure, but make sure it's a meaningful name so that anybody who reads your code will be able to understand what the structure contains. So like your variable name, your structure is the structure name is supposed to indicate what it contains. That's relevant to the structure name. So say you've got something like a struct zombie. So a struct zombie, I don't know if this is meaningful. So it's like how many limbs it has, limb number, and how many points it has been hit. So the hit points and so on. So here we've got two integer data. Maybe you can have um, another data called say char the human name or something. The human, I mean, the name of the human when before it became a zombie. So you can have any type of data inside your structure, but have all those data that is relevant to the structure name. Okay, so you can have anything. You can have an array. You can have pointers. You can have everything in there that you have logged. So in C, basically, when you want to create a zombie out of this, so what we have declared over here is just a blueprint for the zombie. We're just saying that zombie will have these features. So these data that you have over here is like the feature of the zombie. So it has this characteristic, it has the limb number characteristic, it has the number of hit points characteristic, and so on. So it's like the features or the characteristics, however you would like to call it. So just a blueprint. The actual zombie is not created in your memory. Actual zombie out of it, you will need to create an object, and that is what this is. That is what the Z1 here indicates. So struct zombie Z1 basically means a zombie has been which has each of these features. That is the limb number and the hit points. So the memory allocated for Z1 in this case would be uh, memory for the limb number. So since it is an integer, and in most of our operating system, it usually takes 4 bytes. It could also take 2 bytes, but usually we expect that it takes 4 bytes. Um, so it is like 4 bytes for the limb number and 4 bytes for the 4 plus 4, that is 8 bytes allotted for the Z1 zombie. So Z1 is like the name of the zombie, or you can't say name exactly. It's just a name of that object zombie that has been created. All right. So please understand that when you create a structure, it's just a blueprint. Basically tells you what the features of any zombie created would be. So there's no zombie in existence yet. A zombie comes into existence when you create an object out of it. All right. So a C style creation would be having the struct keyword along with it, then the name of the structure that is zombie, so struct zombie and Z1. But a C++ style doesn't require struct, so there's no unnecessary keyword there. You just need to write zombie Z1. So when you write something like zombie Z1, C++ understands that okay, that is some data type uh, which has been created by the user. Right? So it goes above and finds a structure there. So yeah, the structure exists. And then it creates the memory space as features listed in the structure. All right. So basically, this is a user-defined data type. So a structure is the user-defined data type. Similarly, a class that we'll be discussing in our next class is also a user-defined data type. Why user-defined? Because this is something that you are defining. You can define your structure or class with data as you would like. All right, so that is a new data type. The data types that we know are just integer, float, char, and what else? Float, double, so on and so on. Those are all built-in data types. This is a user-defined data type because you're the one who's creating, you're the one who's deciding how much memory this data type should be when you create an object out of it, or you can say a variable out of it. But it would be more meaningful to call it an object because this is slightly different from a variable, right? It contains more, I mean, it's a heavy sized one rather than a normal variable. All right. So for C++, you do not need the struct keyword. You do need the struct keyword over here. This is operations for C or C++ style. This is the same. So you have struct zombie, and you have this curly braces. Within the curly braces, you give all the data, and you should follow that with a semicolon. So do not forget this semicolon. All right. After that, when you create an object out of it, for C++, you do not need to include the struct keyword again. You just need to use the name of the structure followed by the object. So that is just zombie Z1. All right, so Bravo, I understand that you don't need to use struct when creating an object.
We can't hear you anymore.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I don't know what's wrong. I don't find any problem with my internet. I don't know. Is it something wrong with Discord today? I have no idea. It's like too many times.
I would suggest giving Discord just a full restart. It sometimes is a bit finicky.
What is that?
Yeah, give Discord a full restart. It can be real finicky sometimes.
Oh, okay. Maybe the next time I'll just try closing and opening it up again in that case. All right. So, it's the hackers. Okay. I don't think they would like to hack my lecture. They would probably just give it back to me. All right. So I hope, yeah. So that is about a structure. Let's see the declaration. So if you're going to use a structure with C++, you have your struct keyword followed by the name of the structure, and then you have your curly brackets in there. Within the curly brackets, you declare all the data that is relevant to the structure that you're creating. And the ending curly braces should end with a semicolon. Please remember that. That is very important. If you do not do that, the compiler will throw you an error, of course, but it is going to be very difficult for you to figure out where the error is. All right, because probably the error would be shown in the line below or the line below that. It won't exactly show in this at the point of the ending curly bracket, because what it assumes is you've not entered your structure there, and you've gone to do something else below that. All right, so probably the line that it would show the error is maybe one or two lines below that, and it would be really confusing. So rather than get into all that, just remember to put a semicolon after the curly brackets. So here we have a struct vampire, and this has got two characteristics. One is the number of blood points and glamour or whatever you can think of. All right. But of course, whatever we wouldn't like it to, well, we wouldn't like to fill it with any sort of data. Just fill it with the data that's relevant for your project or relevant for your program. Because remember, this is all memory that's used up. So just allocate as much memory as required. So if you just give it unnecessary data, then it's taking up unnecessary memory, and that is again going to slow down your program. Or maybe there wouldn't be enough data left for the other variables in your code. So yeah, to create the vampire object, you just do name the vampire, that is vampire and v1. All right, so Hamish, you can use typedef there, typedef. You don't need to use a typedef actually, Hamish, because we generally use typedef in C, because C requires you to do struct vampire, the name of the and the name of the object. In this case, so in those cases you could use a typedef, but here we are only using the name of the object anyway, right? We are only just using vampire v1. So a typedef is not necessary in this case. You could use a typedef, of course, if you want to give it another name. What is that? Instead of vampire, you want to say something like she-wolf or something. You would still need to say she-wolf v1. So then you're not actually gaining much from there. Yeah, C requires a typedef because C needs you to use a lot of keywords. All right, so Neris, I think Visual Studio will tell you expected semicolon. In cases you're lucky, it might show you, but then maybe if you have, it depends on what code follows the structure. All right, so whatever line of code follows the structure, that depends on maybe you're doing some addition operations or something, or something, I don't know, maybe declaring another variable. So sometimes it shows you the error in the lines that follow. You can never say that. Okay, it all depends on what the code is that you write below that. Okay, so anything else? Any other doubts? Neris, do you want to unmute yourself? Okay, I'll just wait then. We'll have the name of C++ an incrementer. Yeah, it's sort of like C++ is like, yeah, that is in addition to C. So it makes it self-explanatory that it's all taken from C with a few additions. All right, so that is about structures. And how would you access each of these members? Just using the dot operator. Okay, so to access every single member inside your structure, you would just need a dot operator. So say you have something called a gas cylinder with these data in them. So to create an object out of gas cylinder, I would say gas cylinder, say CY1. This is not exactly a meaningful name. Try to create meaningful names even for the objects, all right? Not like this. Of course, if it's just like cylinder 1, cylinder 2, or cylinder, okay, in that case it makes sense, but then wherever possible, try to use a little more meaningful name. So this is like cylinder dot I percentage gas in cylinder. So I'm trying and cylinder dot I hit points is equal to 75. So that's the second data. So you can see how we have used the dot operator to access each of the data. And this data can only be accessed using object name. Remember that. All right. Like I said, only when the object is created does this gas cylinder get a memory in the memory space. So it's like cylinder has a memory for I percent gas in cylinder, which is 4 data bytes, and I hit points, which is again another 4 data bytes. So it's only each of these objects that gets memory in the memory space. Otherwise, this is simply a blueprint, which doesn't have any memory allocated. It's just like memory for the code space. All right. So only when there is memory allocated does giving values make sense. So when memory gets allocated, then you have your values in there using the objects. So I hope that's clear. Some say, okay, C# and C++, all right. Any doubts regarding the accessing of structure members or how you create structures? You guys can unmute yourself if you want to ask questions in between, but of course, when I take the lecture, please mute yourself. Otherwise, okay, I can't see. Yeah.
With the C++ version,
Yeah.
do you pre-declare the variables, or is it sort of like an inheritance situation?
Oh, was it? Sorry, I can't hear you now. Have you muted yourself?
Yeah, sorry. How do you declare the variables for them? And I think I might
Okay,
have
who was
zoned
asking the question?
out. Scott.
You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't know why. Okay, I'll just wait for you to type out the question then. Scott, okay. Yeah, Scott, so what were you asking? Do you want to type? I can't hear your voice, so maybe you can type out the question. The variables are members of each. Yeah, the variables are the members of each instance that you create. So it's this instance that we're calling the object. Okay. Yeah, Scott, if there's still, I mean, if you still have some doubt, please do type that out. All right. Otherwise, I guess I'll just move forward. Just wait for Neros too. Neros, are you fine? Or you have some doubt? Okay, you define a blueprint for an instance, and every instance has its own set of those. Yeah, that's right. So this blueprint is your structure. The class are all blueprints of the instance that you would like to create. All right. So whenever you have a program, whenever you're asked to do a project or a program, we basically check out what are the main objects in the program, and then we decide what features each of those objects should have, what features each of those instances should have, and based on those features, we create a structure or we create a class. And that's why we call C++ as an object-oriented language, because we figure out the objects that are there, and then we start listing out the characteristics of those objects. And that's how we create a structure or a class. And that is why we created it we call it as an object-oriented programming language, because the entire project is thought of in terms of objects and how each of these objects are related to each other. We don't simply think of in terms of functions. We don't just say, okay, what function is required to achieve the objective of the project. We think about what objects are required, what purpose each object should serve, and what are the relationship between the different objects, and yeah, and how these objects should be defined. So it's all thought of in terms of objects, and that's why it is called an object-oriented programming language. All right, so Hamish, and you only assign data to those members once the structure is created. Not once the structure is created, once the object is created or once the instance is created. And this is like the gas cylinder CYL. That is where you create the instance, or that is where you create the object. All right, so only when you create an object can you assign values to it, not when you create the structure. Remember, the structure is just a blueprint. This structure, you do not assign values to the structure. You only assign values when an instance is created out of. This might be getting ahead in the course, but what is the difference between a structure and a class? um, I will get there, Bravo, because at this point it's too early for you to understand. But I'll get there. All right. Probably in the next class. Structures and classes are similar, but there's a small difference between them, which I'll let you know later. I don't think a struct can have a constructor. Well, the main thing is C++ structures do have functions. So C++ structures are similar to classes, but a C structure doesn't. So in C++, there are a few additional allowances rather than C. But usually why you use structures is if you just want to have data in them. All right, that is how we try to limit structures in C++. Classes basically have functions also in them, though this is also allowed in structures. But we try to limit all the functions just to classes and not to structures so that it looks a little more meaningful. Hamish, and the object here. Okay, so yeah, so you assign data to those members once a structure is created. I don't think a structure can have one. So Neris, yeah, a structure can have member methods. You can have it. It's just that in C it is not allowed, but in C++ it is allowed. But like I said, we try not to do that because we want we try to give the permission of we try to make it a practice to only give functions to classes. So that is sort of a good programming practice. Okay, so I guess yeah, that's about it. So let's just move forward. So I hope the structure declaration is clear, structure instance creation is clear, and how to access each of the data members. All right. So moving forward, what is a union? A union is basically, again, a user-defined type. But here in a union, though it might have multiple data in them, at a time, it's just one data that is active. All right. So here, if you see this example over here, union numeric type, I've got an integer data, I've got a long data, and I've got a double data. So at a time, it's just one of this that is going to be active, or one of this that is going to be available. And which one is available depends on the value of the variable that you create out of it. All right. So if I say something like numeric type, and I create numeric type x is equal to 10, or 10 is also confusing. So I'll say numeric type x is equal to 10.5. So this clearly means that this is a double type, and it is a double d value that is going to be, or sorry, I would say numeric type x, and that x dot d value is equal to 10.5. So what I'm clearly saying is it is only the d value that I need active at that time. All right. So it depends on which value you activate over here. So the advantage of a union is maybe you're not sure, like for this example, or you're not sure which numeric type you might require at the moment. But you know, I would need different types for different applications. So depending on the application, I would just use the corresponding data type, and then I would use it, or corresponding value, and then I would use it. So you just need to say dot d value, or the object name dot l value is equal to the value, and that would be activated at the moment. So the advantage is that there's no unnecessary memory wastage for all the other data types. The memory is only allocated for the value that I'm using. If I say d value, it would only allocate 8 bytes of data, and it wouldn't allocate 4 bytes each for the other two data. Or if I say x dot I value, then it would only allocate 4 bytes for the I value, and the others are ignored. All right, so this ensures that there is no memory wastage. So that is your union. Only one of this is going to be available at a time. All right, so you can try experimenting around unions. What about BitFields? So BitFields basically help you to decide how many bits of data that you would require each member to contain. All right. So, like if I declare an unsigned int, a normal unsigned int would take up 4 bytes of data. So, but if I just say, if I say 3 over here, what I'm saying is I only need 3 bits of data. Whereas 4 bytes of data basically means 4 times 8, that is 32 bits of data. So I don't want that much wastage over there. I know a weekday is only going to be from like it's only 7 days a week, and there's nothing else. I mean, there's no 8th day of the week. So that is the maximum that I'm going to use, and I don't need 32 bits of data to store that. So I just need 3 bits of data, so that the rest of the data is not, so the rest of the memory is not wasted. So in cases where you require less storage, you could just indicate it by giving a colon and giving the number of bits in there. So like the month day, colon 6. So this means 6 bits of data for the variable month day, 5 bits of data for month, 8 bits of data for year, and so on. All right. So just indicate the data, just indicate the memory that you want with a colon when you create your structure or when you create your class or when you create your union. Wherever it's allowed, wherever you have the freedom to create a data. So why did I, just an example, why did I use 3 bits of data for this? Because do you remember what the binary value of 7 is? Does anybody remember what the binary value of 7 is?
111.
Nobody? Yeah, it's 111, 0111, or that can also be 111. Okay. So the maximum value 7 is just 111. So as you can see, the maximum value just requires 3 bits of data, and that's why we have given a 3 there. All right. So yeah, it's 000. So you can see how the remaining MSBs are zeros. So that can be ignored. The leading bit zeros can be ignored, and you're just left with 111. All right, and that's why we have 3 over there. So similarly, you can calculate what the bit pattern for 31 is, and you'll find that you would need more than 6 bits for that. Is it possible to assign it a specific number rather than bit size? Why would you need to assign it a specific number? So is this something like a const data, Hamish? If it's something like a const data, you could try it out, yeah. But otherwise, it's not meaningful giving a value to a structure member. It would only make more sense to give it to the objects created out of it. Like I only want 50 to be the max. Oh, in that way, so that well, there's no syntax for that, but maybe you could program something like that in the functions that follow. There's no particular syntax for you to have just 50 as the maximum value. You will need to code it in your program. All right. So yeah, so since this is a structure, each of the members can be accessed by using the dot operator again, limited to the number of bits that's specified over here. All right. So that's about BitFields. I hope that's okay. All right. And next about command line parameters. So if you remember, we had started with before we started off with Visual Studio, we had started off with command line execution. So we had tried to run our code there, and then we had typed out the name of the executable, and then we got the result out. Remember the hello world? So that is the command line. So you could also pass parameters after the executable name. So based on these input values, your program might be doing something with the input values and giving the output values. So even that is possible. But how would you code it in your program if you were to pass values in the command line? Command line after the executable. So your main will need to be slightly modified in this manner. So can you see the difference in this main? You have int main. Usually we just have int main and empty brackets in there. So if you were to pass arguments in there, you will need a declaration of main that looks like this. So it would be int argument c, which counts the number of arguments that you've passed there, char array. Okay, so it's left, the dimension is left as empty because I do not know how many arguments the user would pass in the command line. So depending on the number of arguments, this would get updated. So so the previous example, in the previous slide, we've given test1, test2, test3. So the number of arguments over here is 3. So argc would be 3, and then argv, which is a char array, would contain the first value. At the first index, it would contain test1, that is at argv0. Argv1 would contain test2, and argv1 would contain test2, and argv2 would contain test3. All right. So if you want to print out the values, you just use a for loop as we do usually. So start off with I equal to 0 and I less than argc. So it would go until 3, 0, 1, 2, and then it would creep, printing out the inputs that I've taken from the user. So this is a simple code just to read the arguments from the command line and to print out arguments that I've got from the command line. So I'm saying 0 is equal to the first 0 and test1, and 1 is equal to test2, and so on. Okay. So this is how the the first argument is main.exe. So actually the number of arguments is 4 and not 3. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first one is main.exe, then the next one is test1, test2, and test3. So if you were to pass arguments in the command line, make sure you've also created a main function with 2 arguments in there. So this is an overloaded main function. What do you mean by overloaded functions is you use the same name, same function name, but you have different argument list. So our usual main function that we have done so far does not have any arguments. But this is an overloaded main function which has got 2 arguments because we require it to take arguments from the command line. All right. So another way to do it is in your project properties. So if you go to if you right click your project and open the properties page, just go to the debugging tab in there, and in your debugging tab you find a command arguments option. So in the command arguments, again, you could feed in the values and it works the same, right? So to read these command arguments, you would need a main function which has an int argc and an argv parameter, so that you could read it and do whatever is required there. So this is another way in which you could feed the command arguments if you don't use the command prompt. All right, so that is just additional information. So I can't see any doubts there, so I guess that's all okay. And yeah, and the next one is about variable number of arguments. So so far in our functions, we know how many arguments that we're passing. So if you pass 2 arguments, we basically declare a function prototype to hold the 2 arguments, or if we pass 5 arguments, we just basically declare 5 arguments for our function. But in case we're not aware of how many arguments we would like to pass, we can go for this format of ellipsis. Ellipsis is where you just put 3 dots in there if you're not sure about how many arguments you would like to pass to a function. Okay. So first of all, what you need to do is you need to include a header file called cstdargs. And then after you've declared a function which contains the first argument as an int and the second argument containing ellipsis, we'll see what we need to do next. Okay. So the first argument int basically tells it how many arguments we're passing. So that you will need to know. So this test function, for example, is like a generic function which could take any number of arguments. So maybe at one point you decide I want to pass 3 arguments. So your first argument there should indicate 3. And the second pass 3 arguments. The second set can pass 3 arguments there. Then another function called for test. I decide I want to pass 10 arguments. So the first int value over there I should pass the value 10. And for the second set, I should pass 10 arguments. All right. So based on my usage, I can keep changing the values in here. So it's like a generic function which can take different number of arguments based on my requirement. So how would we access each of these arguments? We will need to make use of these. We will need to make use of all of these keywords. All right. So VA underscore list basically helps us to. It's like a list. A list is basically a collection of data that's stored one after the other. So this list keeps track of all the arguments that we have passed to the function. Right. So if you pass something like, say the same test1, test2, test3, list will hold all that value. So it'll hold the first one would be test1, then the next value would be test2, the next one would be test3. So it's a collection of data that is stored one after the other. And then you would need va underscore start, va underscore arg, which will help you to return the type, and va underscore end after you've done with all the with the usage of the list, and you would like to clean it up. So whenever you use va underscore list, make sure you also end it after you're done with the usage. So it's like a cleanup that you would like to do. That is, clean up all the memory that's been used and then leave it free, like how you had done for the dynamic memory allocation. All right. So remember what dynamic memory allocation is? When you require memory from the heap. So you get memory from the heap whenever you use a new operator. And after you're done with the usage, the new allocates memory to a pointer. After you're done with the usage, you free the memory using the delete. Similarly, you will need to free all the memory that is required to store the arguments inside va underscore list. So rather than talk around this, let's just see an example so it'll be clearer. So taking the same example of int test, this is a generic function prototype where the first one is supposed to store the number of arguments and the second one is your ellipsis where you pass your arguments. All right. So how would we declare it inside the function? How would your test function look like? So first one is your count, and then you declare a va underscore list. So va underscore list is basically a data type that has been, or you can say, it's like a structure that has been designed, or a structure list that has been created in order to store all the arguments that you. So I'm just creating an object out of it. So an object called, and using the va underscore start function, I am allocating memory to the input list. All right, to this input list that I've created. And now using the var function, I will be able to get all the values inside the input into any variable that I like. So va underscore arg basically converts all the data inside the list that you want. So if you go back to the description over here, va underscore arg will pass the va underscore list and the type that you want returned. Right? So if you keep going through this, it will go until the end of your list. So I want the type returned as integer. I want all the value, all the data that is inside the arguments that I've passed converted to an integer, and that's why I've given the second argument as an int. So inside the arg function, there would be a check. I mean, arg function is already defined there, va underscore arg. So there would be a check depending on the data type. So it would check whether I've passed an int or a char or float, and then based on that, it would return the appropriate data type. So this will help me to get the values one at a time from va underscore arg in the data convert to the data type that I require. Just printing out the values. And finally, when I'm done with everything that I want to do with the list, I'll just end it with the input as the argument, because I want to clear up the list that I've created. And that is the end of this example. Okay, so this basically shows you the usage of va underscore list, va underscore start, va underscore arg, and va underscore end. And this is how you could declare. This is how you could use the variable lists in order to do any operation on it. All right. So in this example, the first parameter count is used to define how many parameters are being passed to this function on this call. Okay, so yeah, this is just a brief about if you would ever need to use this. That is, okay, if you can think of some use for variable number of arguments, then you also have the option for it. But in order to use this, make sure you include the cstd args header file. Okay, so hash include cstd args. Only then will all of these be available. Okay, so this is specifically for variable number of arguments. All right, so I think you're all okay. And yeah, that was a brief about structures, unions, BitFields, command line arguments, and variable number of arguments. From these, what's most important is structures, because it's with the help of structures that we'll be moving on to classes. Unions also good to know, good to understand. And yeah, use it whenever you feel whenever you feel it's required. BitFields helps to keep track of your memory and allot only the required amount of memory using bits. Otherwise, command line arguments and variable number of arguments, I'm not sure if you would use it somewhere, but just understand it. You're right. So anything else that you would like to, anything else that you want to ask, anything about today's topics? You're all okay? So I'll just briefly show you what's in the second set of slides. So that is just about basic coding standards. So I'm not going through them. This is for give it like a handbook for you to understand how it is. All right. So initially it's just about the program, about how you need to upskill yourself, what are the general job requirements. So yeah, this is about how basic coding standards, the naming guidelines. All right. So have a look through this. And another thing I want to show you in this was about, wait, I think it's at the end of the slides. Yeah, about this one here. So this is the MDS coding template header. So whenever you create a project, remember to mention, remember to give, this is the coding template header. So at the beginning, at the start of each function, remember to give this sort of template before each function, given your file name, description, author, and your email ID. So that's basically to it's for any company that you would go, there would be a template header that is required based on that company's header. All right. So it's a good programming practice to follow. I know you've not done it so far, but moving forward, try to make it a practice. Before each function, give a format in this manner. So you have file name, description. It's just a one-line description. It doesn't need to be a detailed one. Who has implemented in your code. So if it's in a group that you're doing, given, even for a group, maybe some of you are working on, like one of you is working on 3 functions, the other one is working on 5 functions. So give your name for the functions that you've worked on and your email ID, and the other person who's working on the other function, given their name. Plus, don't forget this media design school header. So in the coming project, you would see that you're required to give a media design school header, and this is what we mean by that. Right, so this is the media design school header, and these are the function headers. So take a note of all these and just have a read through that. Otherwise, for each function, or you need the function headers for each function. So this is just file name, sorry. You would also need another similar one for the function names. All right, so same as this, file name, description. I think that should be, let me see if it is there in the exercises that I've shared in this folder. If I mean in this week, if it's not there for this week, then it should probably be there. It should probably be there in the ones starting from next week. All right. So in the exercises starting next week, you would see that we do have the function headers and the file headers there. So just go through any of the exercises from week 11 onwards. All right. So that would be Bravo. Yeah, so that would be written several times in one file. You wouldn't write the same thing several times in one file. What you would write several times is the name of the different functions. So for each function, you would have a function header. So you would have the first function, I mean, like the first function's name, a description of the function, the arguments in the function, and the author. Okay, you don't write the same information several times. The one that I showed now is just the file header. Similar to this, you would have a function name, description, argument list, author, and email. All right. So this is just letting you know now, maybe like from day 11, so that's when I'll be seeing you next. The exercises would contain the function headers. So that will be, you will be able to understand it better. All right. So just look into the exercises from week 11. All right. So anything else? In the meantime, I'll just be sending you your marks one by one. And was there anything else to say? I did face a couple of problems with your projects. So I did message most of you when I had problems opening the project. So I guess the problem in most cases where you try to rename your project files, you try to structure around the structure that had specified. Please understand that what's more important is, rather than renaming the projects, is that whenever I click the solution file, the .snn file, it should open up the project. All right. If your renaming causes a problem to that, then please do not do that. If your project itself does not open up, then the renaming does not make sense. So what I suggest is when you create your new project, try to look at the format first, see if there is any naming convention that I expect, and try to name the project in the beginning when in the beginning when you create the project itself. So if there's a name that I expect, then give it the name that I've said there. So do not rename the files, do not rename the folder name, do not rename the project folder names, and do not move your files from one location to the other, because that messes up the structure. The reason being that the Visual Studio looks exactly to the path that has been specified when you create the project. So there is a workaround about it. You can go to the properties, you can change the the file path, but then that again could be a headache. So rather than do all that, just make sure you give it the right name in the beginning. And if you have somehow not given the right name, then just put the entire project into a new folder. With the new folder, given the name that I have given in your summative requirements. But do not touch the project structure itself. Just remove only the unwanted files. The unwanted files, when I say, it's like the debug folder, the release folder, what is it? The .pdb, what else? And most of the things that I have given most of the extensions in the summative requirements. So just remove those extensions from there. All right. So yeah, take care of that when you do your project next, because I understand that this is your first project, this is your first time submitting it, but the next time you should be more careful about it. All right. And yeah, that's about it. So anything else that you want to talk about? Project marks, Hamish, it'll take another 2 to 3 weeks. So I'll try not to get it, not to make it as late as 3 weeks, but it still could take 2 weeks. 2 weeks is the minimum time I need. All right. Anything else? I'll still be in the voice channel. All right. So I'll just disconnect from my screen from here, and just let me know if you want help with anything. Okay, I'll just wait for Bravo confirming no class next week. Yeah, there's no class next week. I mean, no programming class next week. You will have your game mechanics on Tuesday, of course. So yeah, you're just meeting me after 2 weeks. You have a break from the programming lecture. All right. And in the meantime, just try working on the exercises and don't forget about your test. So when we see in 2 weeks' time, we'll be having the test, the first thing. Yeah, no class next Monday. Okay. Yeah, so you can peacefully work on your game mechanics project, but don't forget about the test, like I said. Okay, so see you all. I'll still be in the channel till 12:30, so message me for any problems or any doubts that you have. Okay, thank you, and see you all.